If you know Tokyo, you'll know that there are so many different lines, so many different railway companies, right? And I was trying to find my way to a certain station, I can't remember which now, and there was a gentleman dressed in suit, just like yourself. I expect that he was on his way commuting to work, right? And he didn't have to, but he stopped and helped because I was looking at the map. He didn't know what I was doing, but I guess I looked like I need help. And he didn't speak a word of English.
No.
He did not. But what did he do? I pointed to the station, and he actually went over to the ticket machine and bought 2 tickets for me and my mom. And he didn't want to take our money. And I was so inspired by that. I wouldn't expect that from a complete stranger. That will never cross my path ever again, I think, right? But that kind of kindness, right, really reminds me, oh wow, like, look at this, look at the people here. And it's the same wherever I go, to Korea, people are friendly, to Taiwan, people are so welcoming to share about their culture, their history.
One of the reasons I began to dress like this is because, well, besides I began to fit on my previous suits that are like more than 20 years ago, it's also a way to say, hey, I realize I've not been here as often as before, so if people cannot see me again, it's like, okay, that's the last picture. So that's why I usually wear like that. Pretty much, I believe we can start.
Yes, wonderful, let's go.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on the Long Way FVR. Today we have Yvonne. Thanks for doing this.
Hi, thank you, Fabian.
So it's very wonderful that we have the chance to talk today after, let's say, a lot of events that happened recently. Well, one of the few events that is happening right now is the Hari Raya. But because I'm a little unfamiliar, I'm not sure what is going on.
Right, it's one of the major celebrations here that we have in Malaysia. As you are aware, you've been here for a long time, I believe, with ASB as well, and we are multiracial. Of course, Hari Raya is one of the biggest events that we have throughout the year. It's a celebration for our Muslim friends, and along with Hari Raya, of course, the Chinese community has Lunar New Year's, and then of course, our Indian community has Deepavali, Thaipusam, and all of that. That's the beauty of living here in Malaysia.
Imagine that you have the Lunar New Year in January, then you have the Thaipusam in February, and then you have the Hari Raya that happens between March and April. It's like, what are you doing these 4 months, right?
Yes, absolutely. So Hari Raya is a celebration, right? After 1 month of Ramadan, after fasting for a month, our Muslim friends will celebrate with Raya.
Oh yes, that's wonderful. People will be watching you and they will be like, well, it's wonderful that we have this background, but we want to know a little more about yourself. So can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Well, thank you. I'm very honored. So, of course, Malaysian, Chinese Malaysian actually. I've pretty much lived here most of my life. But back in 2011, I believe, I've actually went on to Melbourne, Australia, to further my studies. Yes. Yeah. So I did a Bachelor of Business and majored in Marketing and International Trade. Completely irrelevant to what I'm doing now. Worked there after I graduated for a couple of years, and that's actually how I got into higher education. So I've started my higher education in Melbourne, and I've never left the industry for 12 years now.
That's quite alright.
Yes, it has been.
So I need to ask you, when you were growing up, of course it was a different country than what you see today. What made you say Melbourne is the way to go?
Well, first and foremost, I guess my parents, especially my father, played a huge part in that decision. So my cousin is over at Melbourne, and actually I would say that on both sides of the family, my paternal family and my maternal family, I have been the most involved in education, the way I put it. So I would say that my parents didn't really have an idea, right, about what that entails, what that journey entails, but they know the value of education. So they don't know if that's the right choice that they'll be making or I'll be making, but they believe in, the grass is always greener on the other side, for lack of a better word. But yeah, so that decision was very heavily influenced by family members. But for me personally, I didn't want to be too far away from Malaysia. If you're looking at UK, the States, that's a little bit too far off for me. I wanted to be closer and still engaged with my family. So I made the decision to go over to Melbourne and pursue the final year of my bachelor's actually. And wonderfully, I managed to get a job there in Melbourne, and that's how I got started in higher education. So my very first job, I recall fondly, is actually supporting vocational training for refugees over in Melbourne. So the institution is government funded, and I believe in contributing to a greater cause, and that's why I started the way I started.
It's fascinating that you have that call to help others that were needing help. So how was that interaction on a daily basis? How was like, okay, the expectation versus reality?
Well, I wouldn't say it's all rainbow and sunshine. That's for sure. Because when I interact with refugees, and hearing their stories about spending an entire month without seeing the sun on a boat just to get to Melbourne, that's heartbreaking. Honestly, for them, it's heartbreaking. So they're in pursuit of a better life, and that's what they plan on having, and they are resilient. I'm telling you, they are resilient. What they have endured to get to Melbourne, and not just that, trying to make a living, and that's what the vocational training is all about, right? It's about supplementing them with a skill set for them to be able to survive in Melbourne. And actually, I can tell you that most of them, they don't even speak a word of English. So my role in that was, I would like to believe it was pivotal, in that transformative journey of theirs. So I take great satisfaction in knowing that I've made a change in their lives, and that's what gets me out of bed every single day, and I continue to do that after 12 years. So of course I started that way, but throughout the journey, which probably we'll talk a little bit more about that, things have changed along the way, and me growing as an individual. Yeah.
During your time in Melbourne, I believe there was a good and bad things that are usually not very clear when you see from abroad, especially when we discuss Australia. And especially, I mean, there will be some Kiwis from New Zealand watching this as well. They will be also trying to interest, hey, what is going on there? So what you saw right there that was like interesting?
Well, my experience was over a decade ago. Things have changed completely. I'm sure the place have changed. I haven't been back since, but so I can't say what's the latest developments. But my experience there, when I was there in between 2011 to 2013, a good 2-3 years when I was there, it was actually the most livable city in the world, and they had the best coffee. And I've been an addict ever since to caffeine. What I would say, how did I find the experience? It was not really the place per se. It's absolutely fantastic, that's for sure. It's more of how I grew as an individual and how that contributed to my development. I would say that, before I went to Melbourne, I was very sheltered, very sheltered. I had a support system here. I had my family, my friends. I knew my way around. I knew how to navigate. But, going over there, I believe I was nearly 19 at that time. Going over there and starting everything from scratch. Living on my own, finding my apartment. I arrived in winter, and, for Malaysians, that's a completely new experience. It was the first time I was experiencing winter, actually, I think. And I underestimated the weather, overestimated myself. I went with no duvet, so I was freezing. Mm-hmm. And because I had limited funds when I arrived in Melbourne, my plan was to find a job. So I had limited funds when I arrived in Melbourne, and I didn't want to turn on the heater. So can you imagine? It was I think it was -5 degrees Celsius or even lower during the night. And it was like the wind was breezing, the apartment, it was a shoebox. And I had no duvet. All I had was a shawl, I remember, that I carried on the plane with me, and I was just shivering the entire night. I couldn't sleep. Of course, it's a new place and everything, and I didn't have a duvet. And the first thing I did the next morning when the supermarket was open, I think it was Big W at the time it was called. I just ran over there, wait for the doors to open, and just the first thing I bought was a comforter. Yeah. So these are the kind of things that shape you as a person, things that you take for granted, right? The comfort of your own home, and until you have to stand on your own 2 feet, count every single cent that comes your way, you never really understand the true essence of what it takes to be independent. Yeah.
That reminds me of an actual grandma. She used to say, like, you are not an adult until you live on your own.
Exactly.
And it's like, you realize the little details, how you can actually manage things around. It's like, yeah, it makes sense. I remember that once you are in a tropical environment, going from a cold weather, the first thing you notice is like, okay, I cannot wear the long sleeves.
Yes.
Then you need to adapt to the humidity, because one thing is, for example, the weather of Abu Dhabi or Dubai that is usually dry, and then the weather of Bangkok, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia that is more humid.
Yeah.
And it's like, then number 3, how many hours are you gonna be out? Because this is something that people sometimes totally forgot about it. Oh, I'm gonna be out for 2-3 hours, and then those 2-3 hours become 4-5 hours. Where is your water? Where is your? Are you gonna eat outside? How much have to you pay outside? Or the transportation infrastructure? And also, when it's cold weather, infrastructure also takes a hit.
Exactly.
And you need to adapt and see how you can manage. Oh yeah, it's a total different environment.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Yeah. I remember well because I was stretching every single dollar. I'm embarrassed to admit, but sometimes I would just ride the transportation for free. So we have trams, right, in Melbourne, right? And it's the driver doesn't care. He's just doing his part, driving the tram. And usually, when passengers get on board, they would tap the card, the transit card, and I would stand by. I wouldn't sit on the tram. I would stand by the card scanner, and whenever I see an officer, I would then quickly tap it. And that's, yes, in some way, well, I was working the role, I was getting free rides, right? But that was how I had to live, as a student in Melbourne, in a foreign country where I had no support system, and I had to stretch every dollar and every means, right? So that was, I guess, what I had to go through to grow up, to really understand adulthood, and that shaped me forever. And even though I've seen better days since then, I'll never forget. I'll never forget where I came from, and I guess it anchors me in that sense as how I carry myself as a person, how I am able to resonate or relate to people who are in a struggle. Refugees, students trying to make their way out. Just people, right? And that's what makes us human, being able to relate. Yeah. So I guess that's Yvonne.
Mm-hmm. Melbourne itself is a city that is on its own compared to, let's say, New South Wales or Perth or whichever the other cities are out there. So I believe you also got a chance to see the other places.
Fabian, I would tell you my typical schedule, routine, day to day at the very least, it was wake up, get to work, go to classes, go home, do the basic needs of eating, taking a shower, and jump right into assignments, and then the next day it's the same thing all over again. I was living dollar to dollar. I wasn't making enough to pay rent, let alone explore the country. So no, I did not manage to see the beauty of Australia, the neighboring countries like New Zealand. I've never been, even though I was this close. And to segue a little bit, how I actually ended my journey in Melbourne and made the decision to return home was actually quite tragic. So yeah, eventually I actually arrived in Melbourne in 2011, but it wasn't until 2013 that I finally made enough, aside from paying rent and everything and living expenses, I finally made enough to buy a ticket home, a plane ticket home back to KL. So that's, I guess, 2 years of not seeing my family. Well, of course, we were at that time Skyping every day. Every day for 2 hours, my mom would Skype me. So it was the same thing over and over again. But, it's just that familiar face and voice that, gives me the comfort and make me persevere through my journey. But back to 2013, right? So it wasn't until then that I actually made enough to get a plane ticket to return it to KL, and I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my family that I'm coming back. I wanted it to be a surprise. And little did I know my father was terminally ill. I know it sounds like a drama. I mean, this is 10 years back now. But yeah, my father was terminally ill with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer. And thankfully I made it home. Why? Because in that trip home, he actually passed. So that was the very last chance I got to see him. After 2 years being away from home, finally making enough to afford one plane ticket home. And yes, I managed to meet my father for the very last time. Yeah. So unfortunately, very tragic story, and that incident made me grow up overnight. And everything else fell into place after that. Yes, at the time, how did I manage to afford a plane ticket is because I finally landed a full-time job. After working part-time jobs, multiple part-time jobs, trying to make ends meet, finally I landed a full-time job. I was sponsored by the company on my visa, and everybody would question me like, Yvonne, you are all good, you're settled in Melbourne, you finally made something out of yourself after 2-3 years there, and you persevered. Now you gotta reap your benefits, whatever that you've sowed, reap the rewards. But for me, no, I looked at my mom and I saw her all alone. And when my dad passed, I thought, you know what? This is the woman he loved most. I have to step up now and do what my father did, which was to take care of my mother. So that's why, yes, despite having a full-time job over in Melbourne where it's, supposed to be the grass is green on the other side, I made the tough decision to come home. Yeah, and I never looked back. It was definitely against my father's wishes. Right? Because my father was always like, it's always better outside. It's always better abroad, right? You have better chances over there. Don't come home. He was very against it. He was very resistant. But I really truly believe that if you are good, you'll be good anywhere you go. Just like you, right? You'll be good anywhere you go. And that's something that I carry with myself till this very day. Yeah, regardless of wherever life takes me, I believe that, if you stay true to yourself, you'll go places.
That's also another example of resilience that you mentioned, because it's like you take a decision and you live it by. It's
Yes.
like you actually walk the walk.
Yeah.
And we really are feeling honored that you are sharing all these words with us. So, after the time in Melbourne, you came to KL. What happened during that time? How you found your compass and say that's the way to go?
It was an absolute culture shock. I know. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, but I believe, I don't know what is it exactly. I can't place my finger on it, but I believe that, going there at 19, fresh-faced and, blue-eyed and everything, and, seeing that, wow, the world's my oyster and everything. And suddenly, this kind of incidents, like this kind of experience made you grow up overnight just like that. So I don't know what it is exactly, or maybe it was my first transition into adulthood. I came back and I was so culturally shocked. I don't know, it wasn't even that long that I was away, but I was shocked, especially with the work culture, and that has shaped my career throughout. So I've tried working with local businesses, Malaysian-owned companies. I'm not saying that it's a bad culture, but I wasn't really a good fit. I have a very strong voice and I'm very opinionated, right? And I won't say I'm fixated in my ways, but I do have a very strong stand in things that I believe to be, productive, or, that this might be a good way forward. I'm always open to feedback, but I don't believe in silencing others or power distance or hierarchy. Well, to some form there should be a structure for sure, but it's not about seniority. I don't believe in that. I've always believed that everybody in a room has a voice and should be allowed to voice their thoughts freely. So I do see that certain companies in this landscape might have, perhaps it's an Asian culture, might have that system where it's very seniority based, and I see a lot of juniors actually spending their time in meetings where they're not allowed to speak, and I was shocked. I was shocked at that. That's not something that I was used to, right? I was always empowered, to speak up, voice my thoughts, bring something, contribute to the discussion, bring something to the table. So when I returned, I actually worked with a local company. It didn't really work out well. Then I actually wanted to pursue my studies. So just like you, I decided to do an MBA. But unfortunately, it wasn't with Asia School of Business. I actually started off with University of Nottingham in Malaysia. And because I had an Australian bachelor's degree, I wanted to do a UK one. And that's why I decided on Nottingham. So I was, as you know, very short on funds. And how do I go about funding my MBA? I can't, rely on my family, to fund a choice that I myself made, right? So how did I go about it? I actually started working there first. So they do have staff discount. This was back then. I don't know if they've changed. I think they have, but this was back then. So I managed to get a job in Nottingham, and then I started with my MBA. So Nottingham was a ride. I started with the Wellbeing office. So just like how I choose to do something that resonates with me, I think this job found me some way or another as well. And what did I usually do? I had to support students with learning difficulties on a day-to-day basis, making sure that they are empowered and supported well enough. So for example, students with visual impairment, they need to have the JAWS software to make sure that we transcribe everything. They need readers, they need Braille, right? Everything to be converted to Braille so that they have their lecture materials ready at hand. We do have students with hearing impairment. We do have students with ADD, for example, who are dyslexic. We do have students that are bipolar, facing difficult struggles throughout their journey as a student, but I see that resilience in them, and that's why I think I wanted to extend my support and contribute in any way I can, in their journey, because I want to be able to wake up and say, yes, I've made an impact in somebody's life today. So I have all sorts of stories that probably I shouldn't reveal here, but you get the gist of it. It's about helping people and feeling rewarded at the end of the day. I think that's all I had to hold on to. It's tough. It's tough waking up every single day and seeing multiple people struggle. It's tough. It's not for the light-hearted, that's for sure. And I had been invested in that journey for I think about a year or so, and really I tried my very best, but I continue to struggle myself as well, because there's only so much you can take on personally, and I felt like I was being affected as well. So I decided to move on, and I actually supported the provost. I was his executive assistant, or EA as you know, for the provost of Nottingham, and also the director of campus services. That brought me into another space entirely. That gave me corporate exposure, that gave me networking opportunities, all the foundations that a MBA student would need, and that was so opportune at that moment. So I moved on towards that, and that has been one great ride. That has been monumental throughout my career, because I was following such luminary leaders, with great contributions in terms of research, in terms of management, how you run a school. I was working closely with the board, so that was really a good experience to have as an MBA student. Really day to day, what I did was really relevant, and when I was doing my MBA, I could go into class and present real life issues that I was facing and hear from, of course, different people. As you know, MBAs come from all walks of life, right? So I had, classmates in the oil and gas industry. Some are lawyers, some are even dentists, right? But it doesn't matter. That's the beauty of an MBA. You come into a classroom and you offer different perspectives, and that's what makes the program so dynamic. So that was my MBA experience in short. And since then I've bounced about also in higher education, but eventually I came to Asia School of Business, ASB, and it's my 7th year here now.
7 years?
7th year, yes.
Oh, that means that you have been here from the beginning.
Not the very, very beginning, but yes, when we pretty much started off, I was with the faculty team. I was supporting all the professors. I think back then when I first joined, I think we had a mere 10 faculty, and see how much we've grown since then. And as you know, I've transitioned over to the program office to support student services during the pandemic, right? Because of course we have foreign students like yourself coming into Malaysia onto campus, and it was harsh. It was terrible because they had to be locked down on campus and they had no support. I mean, we couldn't come to work. They needed somebody to constantly be in contact, checking in on them. How are you doing? How are you coping with the program? And as you know, right, our ASB programs are very much having an MIT rigor, right? Drinking from the fire hose. And I would say most MBA programs are designed that way. First terms are always the hardest because it's supposed to be the natural filter to, really demand excellence from our students, and all MBA programs are designed as such. And I guess it was not just students being homesick, dealing with uncertainty, catching up with the ever-changing SOPs from the Ministry of Health, being able to support students in that sense, making sure that they feel at home, they are supported, throughout their journey to be transformative leaders someday. That made me going. That kept me going every day. Yeah. And of course now, at the start of this year in 2024, I've journeyed on, and now I'm helping out with corporate sponsorships, right, for our MBA and executive MBA programs, and also helping out with student journey. So of course, as you know, we have the careers office, we have action learning, we have the alumni, which is ever growing, and of course we have admissions. Right, so I'm helping out with student journey and corporate sponsorships at the moment. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful way to say things that happened in the past, build it towards what we have today. And I need to ask you this because this building was commissioned in 2020, but you've been here more than these labs. So how was Sasana Kijang compared to this place?
I would say we were divided into 3 floors. And it wasn't even an entire floor.
Okay.
So yes, we had a extremely small office space because the rest were classrooms. And I remember at the time, I think we were only allocated 3 classrooms, I think, at most. But back then, we only had a full-time program. And then not long after, we started with the working professional program, and now we've rebranded it to executive MBA, MELV. And back then we didn't have masters in central banking as well, so it was the full-time flagship MBA. So back then it was okay, right, because we had one cohort. So yes, I've seen the batch of 2018 graduate, so the inaugural convocation I was a part of, and I've journeyed on since then. And yes, you've mentioned Sasana Kijang. We were in these cubicles, and yes, we were a small team back then, but that actually facilitated our bonding. Because you could just shout across the cubicles or desks. Some didn't even have cubicles, some were just desks put together. And you could just shout across and say, hey, what's up today? Or, what's happening over there? And you have multiple departments in one space. So you have the finance team there, you have the campus team there. Back then they were called hospitality and events because we didn't have a campus.
Okay.
Yeah, so, everybody was so very integrated in their work. And there were no silos, everybody was, very supportive. And I think that somehow contributes to the culture that we have now, honestly. Anytime I go to any of my colleagues, they're always happy to extend a helping hand. And I think that's what made us grow in such a rapid pace. as a business school. Yeah.
That's such a very nice way to see how things evolve from one place towards the other. And I also remember part of the Sasana Kijang when I did a project with the Alliance for Financial Inclusion there. It is always like the meat of the restaurant there versus what we have here at Vans. And of course, the special discounts and everything. These are different time frames. But also different time frames that also means different landscapes. Because this place was literally a jungle before everything was commissioned.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you've heard certain rumors about this place, but it's an interesting journey, moving from Sasana Kijang over here to campus. All the points you mentioned, right? Of course, now we have the Ben's Cafe, and back then it was actually more of a cafeteria that's subsidized. That's hence the selection of the food and the pricing point as well. Not just that, actually. Right now, here on ASB campus, we actually do have residences as well. So back then we don't. Back then we had to house our students in Lanai Kijang. Accommodation was part of the program, right? Now it's been unbundled. But back then it was part of the program, but we didn't have a residence, right? So we had to house our students over at Lanai Kijang. Right, and it was more restrictive in terms of what they can adopt, what they can have in their living quarters, well, because we were mere tenants, right? But right now with residency, we even have a little bit more leniency in terms of how you like to decorate your room, maybe. Those are the things that we had to work towards. Right, so I would say that we've come a long way from not having our own office, not having our own on-campus residences to what we have now. Right, we have the academic building, we have the residences, we even have a secret garden here, on campus as well.
I would say there are 2 secret gardens.
Yeah,
Which is a very nice showcase. As long as you manage to come here, you will see, okay, there are different trees, there are different flowers, there are 2 different landscapes.
absolutely.
And transportation, commuting. I experienced some because of the trains around, but I believe back in the day when there was no campus, it was only either the train or driving towards the Sasana Kijang.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, we have more infrastructure, which is something that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Given your time here in KL, I need to ask you, which are the little differences you have seen between what you remember in other regions and what you remember here?
So I wouldn't say I've traveled extensively. I mean, compared to my peers, my colleagues, I've heard their travel stories, and I don't believe I've traveled very much in comparison. But I have been in most parts of Asia, that's for sure. I've been over to the States in different capacities. I haven't been to Europe, I haven't been to Africa, but I would say, yes, down under and Australia, I've managed to go to Melbourne and Sydney. That's one small trip that I managed to pull. But yeah, I would say, the exposure of different cultures came through my connections. I might not have been traveling to different parts of the world, but I've met people from different parts of the world. They've come to congregate here. That's the beauty of working at Asia School of Business. I have had my encounters throughout my time in Nottingham as well. So yeah, I haven't been to Europe, to Africa, of course not to Antarctica as well, to the harder to reach regions of the world. But I would say that when I've traveled to say Taiwan, Korea, Japan, that opened my eyes in different ways. Yes, still within Asia, but the culture is very different, right? The people are so polite, so friendly, so welcoming, always happy to help. And I would share one particular story that I had when I was traveling in Tokyo. I was actually bringing my mom. That was quite recent after my father's death. Tokyo is her absolute favorite city in the world, and I thought I'd cheer her up. So with the very little savings that I've had, from my very first job, I took her on a trip, a 1-week trip to Tokyo, and I was trying to find my way, right? If you know Tokyo, you'll know that there are so many different lines, so many different railway companies, right? And I was trying to find my way to a certain station, I can't remember which now, and there was a gentleman dressed in suit, just like yourself. I expect that he was on his way commuting to work, right? And he didn't have to, but he stopped and helped because I was looking at the map. He didn't know what I was doing, but I looked like I guess I looked like I need help. And he didn't speak a word of English.
No.
He did not. But what did he do? I pointed to the station, and he actually went over to the ticket machine and bought 2 tickets for me and my mom. And he didn't want to take our money. And I was so inspired by that. I wouldn't expect that from a complete stranger that will never cross my path ever again, I think, right? But that kind of kindness, right, really reminds me, oh wow, like, look at this, look at the people here. And it's the same wherever I go, to Korea, people are friendly. To Taiwan, people are so welcoming to share about their culture, their history. I've been to Indonesia, I've been, of course, to Singapore multiple times. I've been to Thailand multiple times, I've been to Vietnam, Hong Kong, and, people are just always very friendly, very ready to share, even in a cab ride. They want to talk about the city, their city pride, in being a part of this whole beautiful city, right? So that's Asia. For the States, I've had 2 very different experiences. So the first time I've ever gone to the States is when I actually had to join a study tour as part of my MBA. So I've actually went over to New York and Washington, and we were hosted by multiple companies. So I've had the privilege of visiting UN in New York, United Nations. I've managed to go to National Geographic in Washington. I managed to go to NATO as well, all as a MBA student. So that was very different. And back then, it was, I believe, in 2017. Trump administration just started. Yeah, I think it was the first 100 days of Trump administration, and I was just in Washington, and I think there was a protest going on actually.
So wait a second, that means that you actually saw the lady that is screaming saying no during the inauguration.
Oh, I didn't see anything like that, but I remember I wanted to visit the White House, right? Or just see what is it all about, right? And I walked a really substantial distance all the way because I wasn't familiar, and I wanted to see the city anyway. And there were protests on the streets, right? And armed officers, the military forces were out there guarding the perimeters of the White House. Nobody could come close, so I could only see it from afar. And it was interesting to see everything that was happening throughout as well, with this new administration of Donald Trump. And actually, as part of the study tour, I had certain deliverables, right? So it's a little bit different than what we have here at ASB. So in Nottingham, first, of course, when they open the study tour, there are limited seats available. Nottingham has 4 different campuses. So there's the UK one, the China one, Malaysia, and they also have a teaching facility over in Singapore. But that's very limited because they only offer the MBA program in Singapore. So across 4 different campuses, they only allocate 3 seats to each back then. So it was only a cohort of 12 selected students that are able to go on the study tour. So what do you do to get on the study tour? First, you have to, of course, submit an essay. How's the study tour going to change your life, basically? I did that, got shortlisted, thankfully, and you had to do a presentation on one of the host companies that you're going to, and I was allocated UNGC at the time. So I had to do a presentation on UNGC, and they will actually specify a particular topic. So for example, I think back then it was, what was the recent economic change that actually happened that would affect the organization that you are going to. So I chose the Trump administration and how was that going to affect UNGC. I think, if I'm not mistaken, my presentation was on the NAFTA agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, with surrounding countries like Canada, Mexico, and how is that going to impact UNGC, right? So, it really helped me understand the ecosystem, the politics happening over in the States, the economy, and that really contributed to my knowledge and understanding, and really facilitated my MBA journey as well. So that was very different. The other time that I went over to the States was a couple of years later. So back then, that was my first experience in 2017 as a MBA student. And then, of course, as part of Asia School of Business, I supported one of the cohorts that went over to Boston in MIT. And that was, I believe, in 2022. Very different experience. And I would say that is because I flew right into the eye of the storm of Omicron. I don't know if you remember the strain, but that was the outbreak that was happening. So I believe people were traveling over Christmas at the time. I flew into Boston, January 2022, I remember vividly. And there was an outbreak of Omicron strain, right? And MIT, I don't know how they do it, but they managed to successfully host us on campus, even though it was winter break and there was Omicron. And you don't just have to deal with COVID, you also have to deal with the blizzards that were happening at the time. Yeah, I believe it was like something like negative 20 degrees Celsius.
And Charles River was full of ice.
Frozen completely. Regardless, still beautiful. But yeah, I had to brave the blizzard, brave the COVID outbreak. And unbeknownst to my colleagues and also to the students at the time, I was in my first trimester. So yes, 20 over hours spent on a flight, getting into Boston, dealing with the COVID outbreak, managing a delegation of our students while spending almost close to 1 month in Boston's winter. While being pregnant in my first trimester, it was an experience. I don't know how else to put it. And after spending close to 1 month in Boston, we actually went on to our Dubai industry track. So I think at that time we had a World Expo, and it was very crowded. It was a beautiful experience. Really, I mean, if you ever get a chance to go on a World Expo sometime, someday, I don't know if they're going to do it anytime, anywhere soon, but do so. It was beautifully curated, I got to experience all the different countries in one spot, and it was mind-blowing because every single country, every single culture wanted to showcase what they are made of, their beauty, and it was fascinating to see it all happen in one place. Honestly, it was life-changing, that experience. Yeah, so even though, back to, I know we took a long route to answer your question, but back to your question about, how did I manage to get exposure, traveling and everything, I did it through connections, people coming from all walks of life, from different geographical regions. Yes, to some extent traveling, but also through different exposures, events such as this, like the Dubai World Expo. Yeah.
Those are beautiful memories. They literally are building blocks to what you are.
Exactly, yes.
And one of the things I really wanted to find out more was why in this part of the region people give you a spoon instead of a knife. Like, for example, when you go to eat, all of a sudden you get the fork, but you don't get the knife, you get a spoon. And it's like, what am I supposed to do with it?
Well, I don't think there's a straight answer to that, or perhaps I don't have a straight answer to that. But usually in Asian culture, it's usually rice or noodles, right? That would be our main key ingredient in whatever cuisine that we're having, and we have plenty of cuisines, right? So usually you use a knife if you're having a steak. So of course, if you go to a restaurant, then a knife will be on the table. But typically, if you're having Asian cuisines, then it would be a fork and a spoon, because we usually have rice, which doesn't require. We usually have rice, which doesn't require a knife, and then of course noodles don't as well. So I guess that explains the fork and the spoon. But if you go to a Western restaurant, of course, there's going to be a fork and a knife. And I guess if you go to, say, a Japanese restaurant, there's going to be chopsticks, right? So I guess it's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's like sometimes they give me like the spoon, and it's like I need a knife, and it's like no, we don't have it.
Oh, really?
Fine.
Interesting.
I mean, of course, there are places and places. For example, if I go to a stove center, I ask one of the hawkers, like, look, okay, I'm eating a charmi. They will have no silver, they will have no fork, they will have no spoon. It's like, hey, you only have chopsticks.
Yes.
What do you want?
Yes.
Okay, I got it. It was my own decision to come here. Or if I go to, let's say, one on those banana leaf restaurants,
Oh,
they
yeah.
have none of that because you have to use the hand.
Correct.
But still, I'm trying to figure out what is going on with the knife. Why there are places that you have it, why there are places that you don't have it. Is because of the plate or is because of the place? Who knows?
Well, my take would be the cuisine, I guess. Yeah, but that's my guess. Yeah, my best guess.
Oh yeah, and we discussed about decisions. We also discussed about memories. We even discussed about your compromises that you had to do. And I believe there will be a lot of people watching this. Among those, there will be some young Yvonnes watching
Yeah.
this. So I would like to close this interview by asking you, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, that requires some thought. That's a very good question, Fabian. What advice would I give to my younger self? I would say persevere. I guess you would sense that sentiment throughout, my sharing. I've always anchored my journey towards being resilient, I would say, in some sense. I would never be defeated. I would never be defeated because I believe, through grit and resilience, you would achieve something. You would definitely achieve something. You would be able to change your life. It's just how badly you want it, right? And that's what it takes. Getting out of bed every single day, being resilient. But of course, what's being resilient without something to anchor you? Of course, you have to first identify what are your values. What do you care about in life? For me, it's about being a change maker, being somebody who makes an impact, however small, however insignificant, but in my corner of the world, being able to contribute to something, be it somebody's life, be it somebody's journey, being, for example, in ASB, contributing to building transformative and principled leaders of tomorrow. Any small part I'm able to play in that, find your value, just like how I did, then be resilient throughout, because you have to rely on your faith and your belief in your values, and that's what resilience gets you through to the end of the day. Of course, there's always hardships, there's always struggles, and you'll have your shortcomings. Nobody's born perfect or born ready to do anything that comes your way, and that's the beauty of it. As you learn, grow, and develop throughout the process, see every struggle that comes your way as a part of your journey and learn from it. Learn from it. Don't feel like, this is something, a challenge that I have to overcome. Why am I dealing with this? Why is this happening to me? No, it's an experience that's going to build you from whatever foundations that you've had, bringing you to a better place moving forward. That's what I truly believe in. So I guess, in a nutshell, that's what I would tell my younger self. Keep going.
Yvonne, I couldn't find a better way to close this interview. Thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you for having me.
And for people out there, please stay safe and see you when I see you.
See ya.